Hello, my name is William James. Welcome to this episode of the Bald Book Geek. All of your links and everything you need to get in touch is in the comments, and by the 60-second mark, most of you have switched off this video, but for the people that stay, hi. You're actually worth my time. I want to talk about A Clockwork Orange. This is one of those books that packs a punch, and I'm going to talk about it because it doesn't get a lot of love. It's a stunning work, and it's a true modern classic. And it's also a banned book, which is fascinating in many places. So let's start. And before we get going, like, subscribe for more videos Monday and Wednesday. What is A Clockwork Orange? Clockwork Orange is a dystopian, speculative black comedy novel. It was published in 1962, and it's set in a near-future society that with it has a youth subculture of extreme violence. Teenage protagonist Alex narrates his violent exploits, his experiences with state authority that are intent on reforming him. This book is the story of that. It's almost a celebration of nihilism in many ways, and the book is split into 3 parts. So to give this into the breakdown, part 1 is Alex's world. You have him as a 15-year-old and his gang of friends and their random acts of ultra-violence, and his particular fondness for classical music, and he also loves Beethoven. So that's an interesting little thing to put in. It takes place in a milk bar and drinking milk plus. That's the opening scene, more or less. And a beverage of milk laced with a custom drug of choice. It is a pairing for a night of mayhem. They rob a store, they leave the owner and his wife bloodied and unconscious. The whole first part of this novel is the ultra-violence. They journey through the countryside, joyriding as they break into isolated cottages and terrorise a young couple living there, beating the husband and gang-raping his wife. The husband is a writer and working on a manuscript called The Clockwork Orange, and Alex reads out a paragraph and states that the novel's main theme before shredding the manuscript. You have events like this, and you see his family, the events around him, and the people in this world. The world is, in the novel, and actually in the film, static and white, and modernist and barbaric, where youth is colourful and bright. You have this. The first section of that is his entire exploits of these people, and their craziness, their exploits, their darkness. And before everyone says it, we all have these urges, whether we're aware of them or not. It gets very interesting in this first part, and to read it from that teenage point of view. Part 2 of the book involves he's convicted and sentenced to 14 years in Wordsworth prison. His parents visit him to inform him that his friend has been killed in a botched robbery, and 2 years into his term he obtains a job in the prison chapel, playing music on a stereo to accompany the Christian services. The chaplain mistakes Alex's Bible studies for stirrings of faith. In reality, he's only reading scripture for the violence or sexual passages. When a fellow cellmate blames him for beating a troublesome cellmate to death, he's chosen to undergo an experimental behaviour modification in exchange for the remaining of his sentence to get less time, basically. The technique is aversion therapy, and he's injected with a drug while watching graphically violent films, eventually causing him to become severely ill with the more thoughts of violence. The soundtrack of these films is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, rendering Alex unable to enjoy his beloved classical music as before. It kind of works, but it breaks him completely, and once he is free, the government offices the scene and pleads with the result, and he's released. Part 2 is especially hard to read. Like, I find part 2 the hardest to read on that, just because it's so dark and so intense and kind of frightening, because stuff like this does actually go on in the world. Part 3 is after prison. He returns to his parents' flats. They've rented his room out to a lodger. He is homeless. He wanders the streets. He's looking for painless methods to commit suicide. He meets a scholar that he assaulted in part 1, and he is beaten with the help of several friends. 2 policemen come to Alex's rescue, but turn out to be rival gang leaders. They take Alex outside of town, brutalizing him and abandoning him there. He collapses at the door of an isolated cottage, realizing it's too late, and he is basically facing the inevitable end. But when at that cottage, it's part 1. It goes back to there. He finds the writer who still lives there, and his wife has since died, believing it was her injuries that she sustained during the rape. He does not recognise Alex and gives him shelter, questioning him about the conditioning he has undergone. They are all highly critical of the government, and the pain is used as a symbol of state brutality. You have this almost prison state that is terrifying in that sense. Alex reveals that he was the ringleader of the home invasion gang. He is removed from the cottage and locked in the upper story bedroom. And as a relentless barrage of classical music plays on the speakers, he attempts suicide by leaping from a window. He wakes up in hospital, where he is contacted by a government official, anxious to counter the bad publicity created by his suicide attempt. He is informed that Alexander, the writer, has been put away for Alex's protection and his own, placed in a mental institution. Alex is offered a well-paying job if he agrees to side with the government. A round of tests reveal that his old violent impulses have returned, indicating that the hospital doctors are undoing the effects of his conditioning. As photographers snap pictures, Alex daydreams of violence and reflects, "I was cruel, all right." In the final chapter, you find Alex himself, half-heartedly, preparing for yet another night of crime with a new gang, and after a chance encounter with Pete, who is reformed and married, he finds himself taking less and less pleasure in the acts of senseless violence. He contemplates giving up crimes and becoming a member of society and start a family of his own. While reflecting on this notion that his own children could possibly end up being just as disruptive as he is, if not more so. This book, like I said, packs this massive punch, and the irony is the book is in 3 parts with 7 chapters, but there was an omission of the final chapter in the original US book. It gets kind of complicated, so you have 7 chapters, and each one being, there's like a little intermittent there. The United States publisher wanted for the updates to the American text, they just thought that the American audience would never go for a final chapter in which Alex sees the error of his ways. They left it on a more somber note. Although, now you can get this version in full in the US. This book has been banned, that's what I will say. This book has been, predominantly the US, it was removed from a high school because of objectifiable language. It was removed from another high school over concerns of language. And it was also removed from several libraries, later to be reinstated on a restricted basis. In 1973, a bookseller was arrested for selling the novel, and charges were later dropped. It's quite fascinating, the fact it was more to do with a film courting controversy than the book. The book paints this world, and we do grow out of things. We grow out of who we were as teenagers. We don't recognise ourselves as young people. That's what the book frames in this sort of weird dystopia. It's a parody of what subcultures are. It's a parody of that. It's extreme, it's dark, but it is a parody. It's black comedy. And, you can only repress people so long before they rise up. Clockwork Orange is a modern classic and one that you need to read. It's a phenomenal book.